So here is a homework that we did called More Simplifying and Solving Equations, where ultimately you want to simplify each side of the equation first, and then solve the equation by putting all your variables on one side and then getting it isolated so you find out what one of your variables would be equal to. When you have parentheses, you have to deal with the parentheses first, typically with the distributive property. Yes, none of these ones have it so that you can combine like terms inside the parentheses. So it's going to be distributive property, and then see if you can combine like terms prior to starting your solution. So for the first one, we're going to distribute that 4 inside and get 20t minus 28, distributive property over subtraction, equals 10t plus 2. You look to see if there's any opportunities to simplify that anymore, but there aren't. So now you can start solving. At this point, there are 4 potential points, starting points. You could subtract 20t from each side. You could add 28 to each side. You could subtract 10t from each side. Or you could subtract 2 from each side. I like to try to make a positive coefficient in front of my variable. So my first step is going to be to subtract 10t from each side. And what I'll end up with is 10t minus the 28 equals 2. I do have to show that I did that to both sides to try to get closer to a solution. Now I just have a 2-step equation. I'm going to undo the subtracting of 28 by adding 28 to both sides. And I've got 10t equals 30. So then I'm going to divide by 10 on each side to find that my solution is t rather equals 3. So t equals 3 is my final solution. For the next one, again, distributive property is going to be our first thing to take care of. 18m equals, I believe, 108. Oh gosh, plus 108. Distributive property over addition. Equals the 15m minus 6. Now, like I said before, I personally like to try to have positive amount of variable. I'm going to subtract 15m from each side. That's a personal preference of mine. Not everybody would do that as their first step. Notice over here it ultimately becomes 0 minus 6, which ends up being negative 6. Then I need to get rid of this stuff hanging around my variable, typically in the opposite order as your order of operations. So I'm going to get rid of the adding of 108 by subtracting 108 on each side. So 3m equals negative 114. Divide by 3 on each side. My solution is that m equals negative 28. No, 38. No, 28. Yeah, 38. And that's what happens when I don't do my long division. On my original sheet, I did long division because as much as I like to do mental math, I make more careless errors when I do mental math. So, negative 38. For problem number 3, again, distributive property is going to be my first step. So 48 minus 32w equals w minus 18. I like to have positive amounts of w's. In this case, it means I'm going to add 32w to each side. Now, when I first looked at it, it didn't jump out at me, because typically I like to get rid of what I think is the smaller one, but subtracting 32w can be thought of as adding negative 32w, so negative 32w is smaller than w, a single 1w. So anyway, if that's your choice, you would end up with 48 equals 33w minus 18. So now I'm going to get rid of the numbers on my variable side of my equation. So I end up with 66 equals 33w. 48 plus 18, 66. I divide by 33 on each side, and w equals 2. In any of these cases, if I'm not 100% confident that that's the proper solution, I could plug that number back in to the original equation and verify that the left-hand side, when computed with w equals 2, would equal the right-hand side. So both sides of this would end up equaling negative 16. All right, problem number 4. 3G has nothing going on with it, but it's going to need to be combined with the result of my distributive property, 16G minus 48. And the right-hand side of the equation has nothing to be done to simplify it. So I just rewrite the 2 plus 14G over there. Now I can combine these like terms over here. 19G minus 48 equals 2 plus 14G. Now I have both sides simplified as much as they can, so now is when I can start trying to solve my equation. I'm going to get rid of 14G on each side and end up with 5G minus 48 equals 2. Now I'm going to add 48 on each side to get rid of the constants that's on my variable side. So 5G equals 50. Divide by 5, divide by 5. My solution is that G equals 10. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording while I scroll it up. I'm going to try to at least. And we're back. Now we're going to do problem number 5. Again, distributive property. This time I need to do distributive property on the left-hand side and distributive property on the right-hand side. Something a little funky happens on the left-hand side though. When I do negative 7 times 1, I get negative 7. It's distributive property over subtraction. So minus negative 7 times 4y. That's going to be negative 28y. I know subtracting the negative is the same as adding the positive. So I take care of that right then and there so that I don't, basically mess up that part of my problem. And then over here, it's pretty straightforward, 26y minus 39. Doesn't mean I can't make mistakes if I'm not careful. So even though it's more straightforward than the left-hand side, I still want to carefully apply my distributive property. So negative 7 plus 28y equals 26y minus 39. I personally am going to get rid of the 26y on the right-hand side by subtracting it from both sides. So negative 7 plus 2y equals negative 39. So over here it's like having 0 minus 39. So I get negative 39. That means I need to get rid of the constants over here. So 2y equals negative 32. And then divide by 2, divide by 2, y equals negative 16. Alright, we're nearing the end. The end is in sight. 4n plus 35n minus 15 equals 9n minus 45. Distributive property on each side. Now combining like terms, 39n minus 15 equals 9n minus 45. Now I'm going to get rid of 9n on each side. I'm recording.
Are you talking to me or are you talking to...
I'm recording.
Oh, I'm...
30n minus 15 equals negative 45. I'll pause it when I'm done with this problem. Add 15 to each side. We get 30n equals negative 30. Divide by 30 on each side. Our solution is n equals negative 1. And again, you can plug it in to double check it. I'm going to pause this for a moment. Alright, number 7. Distributive property. Again, we get that funky situation where we have, this one's a little bit different even. See this, the right-hand side, 18 minus 3 times the 16 minus 3b. So it's got the minus 3, which could be thought of as plus the negative 3. Otherwise, you would have to write minus, and then everything that gets distributed would have to be basically in parentheses. So we're going to take a look at how this one works out. So we got 12v plus 6, left-hand side, not so much of a problem, equals 18 minus, now here's where we get a slight potential issue. We could write it, not so close hopefully, my 18 here minus, and then 3 times 16 is 48. And my 3 times my negative, or 3 times the 3v is subtracting 9v. So we could write it like that. More often than not, people jump right to thinking of it as plus a negative 3, and therefore making it negative 48. and then negative 3 times the negative 3v plus 9v. So you could write this first step, or you could think of it as plus a negative 3 times that stuff, and negative 3 times the 16 gives us the negative 48, and then the negative 3 times the negative 3v gets us a positive 9v. So that one gets a little trickier because it's got the subtraction distributed over subtraction. So I don't think the quiz has something quite that tricky, but you should start getting comfortable with these types of problems. 12v plus 6 equals negative 30 plus 9v. I'm going to subtract 9v from each side, and I get 3v plus 6 equals negative 30. Subtract 6 from each side, and 3v equals negative 36. Divide by 3 on each side, v equals negative 12. And then the last one for this homework set. Negative 5 has nothing else going on with it, so it just tags on for the ride. Plus negative 15d plus 1. That really didn't give us much of anything at all. Distributive property over here, 14d minus, so distributed over the subtraction, 32, and then minus the d tags along for the ride. This over here, negative 5 and plus 1, the result of combining those terms is negative 4. Plus a negative 15 is the same as subtracting 15d. So I just try to write it like that to make it a little simpler. Although in my solution on my paper I didn't do that. But either way. Over on the right hand side I combine my terms. My 14d minus a d is 13d minus the 32. So you could do things in more than one step if you wanted to break it out separately. Just as long as it's carefully done, showing all the work. Negative 15, if I think of this as plus negative 15, which it used to be, is my smaller number. So if I add 15d to each side, I'm going to end up with a positive coefficient to my variable d. I have 28d. And then I'm going to add 32 to each side, and end up with 28 equals 28d. Divide by 28 on each side, and d equals 1. And that's the homework review.